Matthew Carroll. I'm here to discuss EXOS ESD of yellow zone training or low intensity training. In this lecture, I'm going to actually break down what yellow zone training is, some of the benefits to it, and some of the pitfalls that we kind of fall into when we're working on that low intensity, guys. And at the end, explain why it's important and different training programs that we can do off of yellow zone training. When we first started the lecture on ESD, we actually talked about speed, power versus time. When we first doing high intensity exercise, we see that there's a high speed or high power output for a short duration of time. As we increase the amount of time, our body is not able to produce the same amount of speed, so we're not able to run 200-meter sprint for 3 miles. This increase in time, we actually see a decrease in speed and power. So when we're talking about yellow zone training, we're actually falling into anything after 30 minutes. What's kind of nice about it, it helps with recovery, helps increase fat oxidation, and also works on endurance. So if you're a long distance runner, this is usually where a lot of you guys are training at, that low intensity. So what we're going to do is actually look at the two major components of energy production of fat oxidation and carbohydrate oxidation. So what I love about this picture, it talks about low intensity, moderate intensity, and high intensity. What ends up happening with fat oxidation on all these 3 levels, and what happens in carbohydrate on all these 3 levels. CHO is a short term for carbohydrate. So what we end up seeing is that working at that low intensity, we show that from about 20 to about 55% intensity, we see a larger portion of fat oxidation than carbohydrate oxidation. And then as soon as we shift into that moderate, we kind of see that split between the carbohydrate and the fat, where we see a flip where there's more hydratic oxidation than there is fat oxidation. Well, it turns out on average, runners spend about 45.8% of their time running at a low intensity and about 45.7% at a moderate intensity and 8.9% at high. So what this is saying is that a lot of the times we think we're working at a low intensity, we think we're burning fat, we're actually burning a little bit more of carbohydrate because the body shifts into that moderate intensity. So as you can kind of point out from the bar graph, is that shift ends up happening. It's one of the reasons why they kind of recommend 30 minutes, is because then we kind of see that shift come back into that fat oxidation. So some of the benefits that we kind of see off of low intensity training, it's less stressful on the body because we're not working at high intensity, improves blood flow to the muscle because we're building capillaries that are providing blood and oxygen to the muscle. There's an increased capacity of muscle fibers to generate ATP. What ends up happening is that the body actually becomes adapted to it, and so we see a split in the cells and more increase in mitochondria, and so we actually see the muscle become more efficient. We also see an increases in endurance. We also see the muscles release a large amount of the cell compound called interleukin-6, which contributes to fatigue. Well-trained runners produce less IL-6, and this is one of the reasons why they are more fatigue resistant. It is believed that exposure to large amounts of IL-6 during running is itself the primary reason of physiological adaptation that reduces the IL-6 in future workouts and boosts endurance. So basically what this is saying is that we become resistant to this the more we do long distance running. Another benefit that we kind of fall into is that it helps us recover, helps our brain recover from the day. And then the last, it increases our ventilation threshold. Well, we'll talk about this a little bit later on. And the last one, as I talked about previously, it actually burns fat oxidation. Well, there's 2 different types of components to low intensity training. There's the interval training and the continuous. How do we do interval training at low intensity? Well, interval training actually helps train your ventilation threshold. What is ventilation threshold? Well, it is the intensity at level at which the breathing rate abruptly changes. So, our normal breathing actually has a term called hyperpnea, and then, of course, everyone knows hyperventilation. So hyperpnea is just our normal breath, and the point at which we change from a normal breath to hyperventilating is called ventilation threshold. is that change. What's kind of cool about this is that you can actually train yourself to understand of when we are breathing normal and when we're hyperventilating, and kind of understand of where that low intensity is. So continuous training has two levels. It has long, slow distance, and has recovery. So for that long, slow distance, adaptations from exercise includes the following: enhances the body's ability to clear lactic acid. We have three types of fibers in our body. We have type fiber 2X, 2A, and type 1. So what's kind of cool about type 2X is that it's a kind of intermediate. If we train frequently as a runner, we'll actually see the type 2X turn into a type 1 fiber, or if we're doing training with weights, we'll kind of see that type 2X go into a type 2A fiber and work on more of that muscular component. The other component of continuous running is recovery. What kind of clears the brain. Working at that low intensity lasts long enough to tire the brain out and strengthen parts of the brain that aid in fatigue. It's kind of where we fall into the IL-6. We're training the brain to reduce the amount of fatigue. There are pitfalls to low intensity training. About 50% of the people that take up a running distance program actually do get hurt. Because, again, orthopedic costs. Running is not free. So, again, we talked about this, but it's 1,400 to 1,700 foot contacts per mile, 2 to 5 times the body weight depending on the speed, and it's a lot of stress on the body. Probably the most important thing, it's one of the reasons why I highlighted it, bolded it, underlined it. If I could have more arrows pointing at it, I would. You have to listen to your body. One of the big components of low intensity training is you kind of have to look at these buckets. Are we filling up each bucket? Are we working on the movement? Are we working on power? Are we working on conditioning? Are we working on training? And working on strength? Each of these components is actually helping involve that low intensity. And it's one of those things that a lot of runners, endurance runners, fall into, is that they spend so much time in low intensity, that long duration runs, that they don't spend the time working on the movement. They don't work on power. They just fill up their bucket on conditioning and training and strength. So probably the most important for any long distance runner listening to this lecture is please work on movement, your movement patterns. Please work on power, work on training style, and work on strength. Well, this is the end of the lecture. I hope you guys enjoyed this lecture and you learned a little bit of information on yellow zone training. If you want to learn more or have any questions, you can always email me at mcarroll@teamexos.com, or you can always ask any of your trainers at your sites. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.